Hi. In this lecture, I'll explain the interactive development environment, our IDE, that we'll be using for 2102. It's called VS Code. An interactive development environment is a tool for developing software or for managing other kinds of collections of files. You can open a directory full of files and subdirectories. You can edit data files using an IDE. You can cause actions to be taken, such as compilers to be run, debuggers to be applied, version control systems to be used. So an integrated development environment essentially is an environment that maintains a collection of files, structured as a tree as usual, and that provides you a set of what we call integrated tools for dealing with those files: editors, compilers, debuggers, linkers, profilers, and other such tools as examples. By integrated, we mean that the IDE itself handles the invocation and coordination of these tools so that you don't have to issue a bunch of separate command line commands to make the tools work together in an effective way. So as I said, the IDE that we'll use in this class is called VS Code. It's an extremely popular IDE and maybe the most popular IDE out there right now. And in addition to being an integrated environment, it's also extensible. So it has a whole marketplace of extensions that you can add into the IDE to provide tool support for developing software in Java, Python, Lean, JavaScript, TypeScript, you name it. There are literally thousands of plugins for developing software using many different external toolkits. Java compilers, Python compilers, Lean compilers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so for this class, we're going to need a couple of pieces to make all of this work. We're going to need VS Code. We're going to need an extension for Lean that teaches VS Code how to interact with external Lean tools. And then we'll need the Lean compiler and other external tools that we'll install separately from the IDE itself. Okay, so here we'll see how to install VS Code and the Lean extension for VS Code, but then we'll also have to install the Lean tools themselves, and at that point, the IDE will be capable of using those tools automatically to help you develop logic expressions and software files written in Lean. So at this point, I think I can trust that you can download and install VS Code without much problem. It's very straightforward. The link is here on the screen. Go to https://code.visualstudio.com/download as written. Just stop the video at this point if you want to keep that URL on the screen for a few extra seconds. Download and run the installer for your operating system, and that's pretty much it. If you're on an OS X machine, there's just one installer. If you're on Windows, download the 64-bit installer for individual user rather than for all users on your system. So download the 64-bit user installer. If you have privileges to install software across, for all users on your machine, you might want to download the system installer instead, and that will work fine too. Okay. So go ahead and do that now, and then restart the video when you're ready. Okay, so now you can launch VS Code on your computer. If you're using OS X, you can go to your Launchpad and type in VS, and the VS Code icon will probably pop up. If you're on Windows, do the equivalent thing by doing search down in the lower left corner of your Windows screen. Type in VS Code, and an icon to run the VS Code app will come up. At this point, you'll have VS Code running in a window, and you'll also probably have a little icon in your toolbar down on the bottom of your screen. I like to right-click on that and kind of pin that icon in place so that it remains even after I exit from VS Code, because then I can very quickly start up VS Code again by just clicking on that icon in my toolbar. And by the way, I do the same thing with the terminal program, whether it's terminal on OS X or or the bash git bash shell on a Windows machine. Once it's running, you'll have an icon down on your toolbar at the bottom, typically at the bottom of your screen. You can right-click and pin that icon in place so that even after the terminal program has exited, you can start it up again very quickly just by clicking on that icon. Okay, now when you first install VS Code, you can't actually run it by issuing a command line command in a terminal. But there's an easy way to configure VS Code to make it runnable from the command line, and I find that to be useful and convenient pretty often, actually. So here's how you configure VS Code. And at this point, no, I think we'll just proceed with the slides here. Again, you can stop or slow down the presentation so you can go off and do this on your own. So crank up VS Code if it's not already running. And then go to the View Command Palette option. You can either do that by going to the View menu and selecting Command Palette, or you can do this. There's a shortcut, Control-Shift-P on Windows, Command-Shift-P on an OS X machine. And that will bring up a long scrollable list of all of the commands that VS Code knows how to carry out on your behalf. In that list are commands that are built into VS Code, along with commands that come and get loaded when you add VS Code extensions to your environment. Okay, so in the search bar now, in the search text box, search for shell command, install code command in path. When you partially type that in, everything that says shell command should probably come up. Just look through the list and click on the item that says install code command in path. What this does is it creates a little program file somewhere on your machine called code, so you can just type code to run the program, and it modifies your search path so that that file is found when you issue the code command. Now you should be able to exit from a terminal window if you've already got one running and start it back up again. That will cause your search path to be refreshed. Enter the code command, and that should launch VS Code. Good. The next step is to configure VS Code with the lean extension. So here you're going to learn how to add extensions into VS Code, and I'd encourage you to look around at different extensions you might want to use. For example, if you're a Python programmer, maybe you want to look at Python extensions later on. Same with C++ or other languages you might be using. Okay, so for now, what you need to do is open up the extensions marketplace. And over on the left-hand side of your screen, there's a column of icons. Look for the extensions one. As you hover your cursor over the icons, you should see little tooltip pop-ups that tell you what category of tools are available behind that icon. Find the one. It looks like a kind of a square divided up into 4 squares with one of those little squares out of place. That's the extensions marketplace. Click there. Then search for Lean Prover when the little search box comes up, and you should see a Lean Prover extension right at the top of the list. Click on that. Then over on the right, click Install, and it takes only a second or two to install the Lean extension, and so now you're done. Okay, the only remaining task to have a fully set up Lean environment for dealing with Lean code this semester, and also to have a tool for editing all kinds of files. All we really have to do is now install the Lean software itself on your machine, and then you'll be good to go. That's a separate video that's coming up. One last little convenient thing to set up inside of VS Code is to configure VS Code so that when you ask for a terminal window inside of VS Code, you get a bash terminal, a bash shell running in the terminal window, rather than some other shell program. You're kind of hip to bash at this point, so let's configure VS Code so that when you ask it to launch a terminal within VS Code, you get a bash shell running inside of the VS Code's terminal window. If you're on OS X, you can skip the rest of this page because you're already all set. If you're on Windows, here's what to do. Select the View Command Palette menu again. Search for terminal:/select default shell. And if you've succeeded in installing Git Bash as we hope and expect you have, then Git Bash should be an option in that list. Now, a few times in the past, we've found that Git Bash doesn't show up in that list for some students. If it doesn't show up, let us know and we'll try to help. But also realize, this isn't a make or break issue for the class. It's sort of a small convenience because you can always launch a Git Bash shell outside of VS Code if you have to. Okay, so select the Git Bash option. Then, to see if it's working, select the View Terminal option, starting at the View menu item at the top of your screen and then selecting Terminal to get a terminal window running right inside of VS Code. And if everything has worked, it should be a Bash window, and you should be familiar with how to use that from the previous talks. Okay, at this point, you're done installing and configuring VS Code. Let us know if you have any problems, and we'll be happy to help.